They brought her to Broken Mesa at sundown with a wooden tag hanging from her neck, and the words burned into it made the whole yard feel colder than evening. Debt paid. Elias Mercer stood by the corral gate with one hand on the weathered rail, watching Silas Crow ride in with 3 men behind him and an Apache woman walking beside the horses through red dust. She was young, maybe 26, with long black hair, dark eyes, and a face held so still it looked carved from river stone. The rope around her wrists had left marks, but she did not lower her head. Not once. Silas smiled like a man who had never mistaken cruelty for anything but business. Her dead uncle owed me $60, 2 horses, and winter feed, he said. This settles it. Elias looked at the woman, then at the tag. Around them, the wind moved through dry grass, carrying the smell of horse sweat, sagebrush, and a storm too far away to help anyone. Cut her loose, Elias said. Silas tilted his head. You have not heard the bargain. I heard enough. One of Silas's men laughed. Refuse the paper, Mercer, and she goes north to the mining camp. They pay cash there and ask fewer questions. The woman's eyes flickered once. Elias saw it. Not fear of him. Fear of the road beyond him. Silas pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. Sign, and she stays. Do not sign, and she rides out before dark. Elias took the paper. The Apache woman watched him like she already hated him for touching it. Maybe she had the right. Maybe every white man with a pen looked the same from where she stood. Elias signed his name once, slow and clean, then folded the paper and put it in his vest pocket. Silas grinned. Paid in full. Elias stepped toward the woman, stopping far enough away that she did not have to step back. My name is Elias Mercer, he said quietly. I signed that so he could not take you farther. She said nothing. Her stare stayed hard. Elias turned to Silas. Now get off my land. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Silas laughed, gathered his reins, and rode away with his men trailing behind him in a slow line of dust. When they were gone, only the woman, the tag, and the dying light remained. Elias drew his knife, held it by the blade, and offered her the handle. You can cut the rope yourself. She took it without thanks. The leather fell from her wrists. The wooden tag still hung at her throat. She looked down at it, then back at him. Do you think that makes you kind? Elias looked toward the empty road where Silas had disappeared. No, ma'am, he said. I think it makes me late. The house at Broken Mesa had 2 rooms, but Elias made it feel larger by stepping out of it. He set beans, cornbread, and water on the table, then backed away as if every foot of distance was a promise. The Apache woman stood near the hearth with the knife still in her hand and the cut ropes lying near her boots. She had not told him her name. Elias had not asked twice. Outside, the last light faded along the ridges, and the corral posts turned black against a violet sky. You can eat at the table, he said. Or not. Door stays open either way. She looked at the open door. A door can be open and still be a trap. Elias nodded. Yes, ma'am. It can. He took his blanket from a peg and walked toward the porch. Where are you going? Barn. This is your house. Tonight it is yours. That troubled her more than a threat would have. Her eyes searched for the hook hidden inside his kindness, because life had taught her that kindness from men like him usually came with a price named later. Elias did not explain. He pointed beyond the yard, where a dun mare stood saddled near the trough. Moon comes up over that gap in about an hour. Trail west runs behind the wash. If you take her, she will carry you 15 miles before she wants rest. Her face changed, not soft, not grateful, only uncertain. You would let me leave? I am not letting you do anything, he said. I am telling you what is there. Then he stepped outside and left the door partly open. Inside, Iona Red Willow stood very still. She had not spoken her name, but she held it inside her like a coal no one could steal. She waited until the barn door creaked, until the ranch settled. Into evening sounds. A horse breathing, wind brushing dry grass, a loose shutter tapping once. Only then did she move. She ate because hunger was not pride. She drank because thirst did not care about hatred. Then she took the wooden tag from her neck, stared at the burned words, and set it face down on the table. Debt paid. No, not paid. Not forgotten. When the moon rose, she slipped through the back door with the knife in her sleeve and crossed the yard without a sound. The mare lifted her head, but did not shy. Iona touched the animal's neck, whispering in Apache, and swung into the saddle. For one breath, freedom opened before her like cool water. Then a lantern flared beyond the wash. Another answered from the cottonwoods. 3 riders moved out of the dark. A 4th waited near the fence line. Silas had not trusted Elias. Of course he had not. A voice called softly, "Going somewhere?" Iona turned the mare, but the trap had closed around the trail. Then from the ridge above came the sharp crack of a rifle fired into empty sky. The riders cursed as their horses shifted in confusion. Elias stood outlined against the moon, rifle raised high, aimed at no man. "Ride low," he called. Iona did not hesitate. She leaned close to the mare's neck as Elias struck the lantern rope with a second shot, dropping the light into the dust and throwing the wash into darkness. Hooves thundered. Elias came down the slope on his own horse, cutting between her and the riders. As they entered the narrow mouth of the canyon, she saw something swing from his neck beneath his open collar. A silver coin with a small hole through it, tied on old leather. Apache work. Her breath caught. Elias looked over once. "Can you ride?" Iona's hands tightened on the reins. "Better than you." For the first time that night, Elias almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Then prove it." The canyon swallowed them whole. 1 minute the riders behind them were calling through the dark, and the next there was only stone, moonlight, and the hard breathing of horses moving between walls of red rock. Iona rode ahead because she knew how to read narrow places. Elias led her. That alone made her glance back. More than once. Most men chased control when they were afraid. He surrendered it to the person who knew the ground better. The trail bent through a dry wash, climbed over broken shale, then dropped into a hidden hollow where cottonwoods grew thin and pale around a spring no wider than a wagon wheel. Elias raised one hand, and both horses slowed. "We stop here." Iona listened. No hoofbeats now. Only crickets, wind, and water touching stone. She slid from the saddle before he could offer help, keeping the knife in her hand and distance between them. Elias tied his horse, then pointed to the spring. "Water is clean. You know Apache trails," she said. It was not a compliment. Elias took off his hat and looked toward the canyon mouth. "Some of them. White men know our trails when they are hunting us." He accepted the words as if he had earned them. "Yes." That answer unsettled her. She expected denial. Men with guilty memories usually buried them under louder voices. Elias crouched by the spring, filled his canteen, and set it on a flat stone halfway between them. He did not carry it to her. He did not make her take it from his hand. Iona looked at the canteen, then at the silver coin hanging at his throat. In the moonlight, she could see it clearly now. A worn $50, drilled near the edge, wrapped with 2 tiny bands of etched silver. The pattern was old. Red willow work. Her mother's work. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Elias's hand moved toward the coin, then stopped before touching it. "From a woman near San Carlos. Long time ago." "Her name?" Elias looked at her. "Tala Red Willow." The hollow went quiet in a different way. Not empty. Waiting. Iona stepped closer despite herself, the knife lowering by an inch. "That was my mother." Elias closed his eyes for one breath, and when he opened them, something heavy had settled behind them. I wondered. "Do not lie to me." "I will not." He sat back on his heels. "I was 22. Wearing a blue coat I had no right to wear. There was a holding camp east of here. Fever came through before winter rain. Your mother was brought in to help the sick because our doctor had run out of answers." Iona's mouth hardened. "You kept her prisoner." "The army did," Elias said. "I stood there and let the world be what it was." The answer carried more shame than excuse. The spring clicked over pebbles. A captain wanted her moved at dawn. She was weak from helping others. I opened the back gate instead. Iona stared at him. She had heard this story as a child, but never with his face attached to it. Her mother had spoken of a quiet soldier who gave her water and looked away when she ran. "She gave you the coin," Iona said. "She said it was not payment." Elias touched it with 2 fingers. "She said it was a weight. Something to remind me that mercy given late is still not enough unless a man keeps giving it." Iona looked away first. She hated that. She hated the way anger now had to make room for something more complicated. The man who signed Silas Crow's paper was also the man her mother had once trusted for one open gate. That did not make him safe. It did not make him forgiven. But it made him harder to hate cleanly. Elias stood and walked to the horses, giving her his back in a way no cautious man should have done. There is an old shelter half a mile up, he said. Food, blankets, medicine. I have kept it stocked for families passing through. Why? Iona asked. He tightened a saddle strap with tired hands. Because I used to help close gates. Now I open what I can. The shelter waited above the hollow like something the canyon had chosen to hide. Elias led the horses along a trail so narrow the stirrups brushed stone, then stopped beneath an overhang where smoke stains marked the ceiling and old cedar branches had been stacked to break the wind. A small wooden box sat behind a flat rock. Inside were folded blankets, dried apples, bandages, a tin of salve, and 2 sacks of cornmeal wrapped against the damp. Iona stood at the entrance, studying it all with wary silence. How many know about this place? She asked. Elias set his rifle against the wall and stepped away from it. Those who need it. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Her wrist had begun to throb now that the riding had stopped. The rope marks had darkened where the leather had bitten deep, and dust clung to the raw skin. She tried to hide it by folding her arms, but Elias saw anyway. Men who carried guilt learned to notice pain before it spoke. There is salve, he said. I can leave it on the rock. I can tin myself. I figured. He placed the tin and clean cloth near the fire pit, then turned his back and busied himself with the horses outside. Iona waited until he was gone before kneeling. The salve smelled of pine pitch and bitter root. Apache medicine mixed with frontier habit. Her mother would have known that smell. The thought came too suddenly, and for a moment the shelter blurred. She pressed the cloth to her wrist and breathed through it, slow and silent, refusing to let even the stone walls hear weakness. When Elias returned, he carried dry mesquite and did not look at her hands. Cold will settle hard before morning, he said. Fire would show smoke. Then no fire. He nodded, accepting her decision as if it carried equal weight. That was the strange thing about him. He did not ask permission in a timid way. He simply left space where force might have been. Iona watched him spread one blanket near the entrance and another deeper inside. He took the one by the wind. You sleep there? She asked. Yes. So I cannot leave without stepping over you. Elias paused, then moved his blanket outside the overhang and laid it beneath the open sky. Now you can. The answer struck her harder than it should have. She wanted to call it performance. She wanted to say he was acting decent because she was watching. But no man performed kindness that quietly unless he had practiced it alone. Night deepened. Coyotes called far beyond the wash. Thin voices carrying over miles of dark land. Iona sat wrapped in a blanket, the knife beside her knee. Elias lay outside with his hat over his face, though she knew he was not sleeping. Neither was she. After a long while, she spoke into the dark. My name is Iona Red Willow. Elias did not move. I know. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. How? Silas said Red Willow under his breath when he thought I was looking at the paper. And you did not ask. A name should not be taken just because a man hears it. The wind crossed the rocks between them. Something inside her shifted, small as a coal settling in ash. She stared at the wooden tag she had carried from the ranch, now lying beside her like a dead insect. He called me payment, she said. Elias's voice came from the dark, low and rough. He was wrong. You signed. Yes. Then what am I to you? For a long time, he said nothing, not because he had no answer, but because he seemed to know the answer mattered. Finally, he spoke. A woman I am trying to get free before worse men find her. Iona looked toward the pale edge of the overhang, where his shape lay between her and the cold, open night. And after that, Elias breathed out slowly. After that, you decide who you are without any white man's paper saying it for you. She turned away before her face could betray her. But when sleep came near dawn, the knife was still beside her hand, and for the first time since Silas Crow had tied that tag around her neck, her fingers were not closed around it. Morning came pale and cold over the canyon, laying a thin silver line across the shelter. Iona woke before Elias moved, the way people wake when the world has not yet decided whether it means them harm. For a moment, she forgot the wooden tag, the paper, the men waiting in the dark. There was only stone after night air, horses breathing below, and Elias outside the overhang, sitting with his back against a rock and his hat in his hands. He had stayed awake. She knew it by the red in his eyes and the stiffness in his shoulders. Not guarding her like property, guarding the canyon like a man who expected trouble to arrive, wearing a smile. "You did not sleep," she said. Elias looked toward the eastern ridge. "Some nights are better watched." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Because of Silas?" "Because men like Silas do not lose easy." He stood and brushed dust from his coat. "There is a doctor in Mercy Creek who owes me a favor. Your wrist needs proper cleaning." Iona looked at the dark marks around her skin. Pride rose first. Pain followed close behind. "I do not need your town." "No," Elias said. "But you may need medicine that is not in this box." By mid-morning, they rode down from the canyon into open country, keeping to dry creek beds and low ridges where mesquite scratched at their boots. The land stretched wide, all yellow grass, red dirt, and blue sky too bright to trust. As Mercy Creek came into view, Iona felt the air change. Towns had a sound before they had a shape. Hammer on board. Wagon wheel over packed earth. A dog barking twice, then stopping. And beneath it all, the silence that fell when strangers were noticed. Elias rode beside her, not ahead, not behind. That, too, the town noticed. Men outside the livery stopped talking. A woman carrying flour pulled her child closer. Two boys stared until their father turned them away. Iona kept her chin high, but every stare landed somewhere. Elias tied the horses outside Dr. Bell's narrow office and stepped onto the boardwalk. The doctor was an old man with white whiskers and spectacles low on his nose. He opened the door halfway. His eyes moved from Elias to Iona, then to the street behind them. "I cannot invite trouble today, Elias." Elias placed a silver dollar on the porch rail. "I am not selling trouble. I am buying medicine." Dr. Bell swallowed. "It is not that simple. It never is when courage costs more than talk." Before the doctor could answer, the saloon doors across the street swung open. Silas Crow stepped out with a smile already prepared, clean coat buttoned, boots polished, hat tipped just enough to look friendly to fools. "Well now," he called. Mercer brought his bargain into town. A few men laughed, not loud, but enough. Iona's fingers tightened around the reins. Elias did not turn right away. He took the small packet of salve and clean bandage the doctor finally set on the rail, then looked toward Silas. "She is not a bargain." Silas walked closer, hands open, every inch the honest businessman he pretended to be. "Funny thing, Elias. Paper says otherwise. Paper can lie." The smile thinned on Silas's face. For one breath, something ugly showed through, then vanished. "Careful. Folks might wonder why a lonely cowboy is so eager to protect an Apache woman." The street went quiet enough to hear a horse stamp near the trough. Iona waited for Elias to defend himself, to explain, to say he was not what they thought. Instead, he stepped down from the boardwalk, crossed to her horse, and held up the medicine where she could reach it. "For your wrist," he said. No shame, no apology, no hand claiming hers. Just the medicine, held steady while the town watched. Iona took it. Their fingers did not touch, but something passed between them anyway, quiet as dust crossing sunlight. Then from the far end of the street, a rider came hard from the north road and pulled up in front of Silas. He leaned close and whispered something that made Silas's smile disappear. Iona saw it. Elias saw it too. Silas turned his eyes back toward her, and for the first time since Broken Mesa, he looked afraid not of losing property, but of a secret walking around alive. They left Mercy Creek without haste, because haste made guilt easy for a crowd to smell. Elias rode with his eyes forward, but Iona knew he was watching every window by reflection, every porch by sound, every man who stopped speaking when they passed. Silas Crow did not follow. That was worse. A man like Silas only stood still when another part of his plan had already started moving. The north road bent away from town and carried them through 2 miles of dust before Iona finally spoke. "He is afraid of what I know." Elias glanced at her. "Then it is time I know it too." She kept riding for another 100 yards, measuring the horizon, the gullies, the thin line of cottonwoods where a person could hide a horse. Trust did not come because a man had kind eyes or old shame. Trust came when the truth had nowhere else safe to stand. At last, she reined in near a dry arroyo and touched the hem of her dress. "Silas did not take me for a debt," she said. "He took me because I saw him sell rifles." Elias went still, not surprised. Worse, confirmed. Iona pulled a small thread loose from the inner seam, and opened a fold of cloth no wider than 2 fingers. From it, she drew a creased strip of paper, worn soft from being carried close. On it were marks, dates, creek names, and a rough map leading from the old freight road to a wash north of Broken Mesa. He met men there, she said. White men dressed for the trail. Not Apache, not soldiers. Men who wanted others blamed for what they planned to do. The wind moved dry grass against the horse's legs. Elias took the paper only after she held it out fully. His eyes followed the lines, and his face seemed to age in the space of a breath. This route runs near ranches already scared of raids, he said. If shots are heard, if horses go missing, Mercy Creek will point toward your people before the dust settles. That is what Silas wants. Her voice stayed level, but the words had heat beneath them. Fear buys guns. Fear sells land. Fear makes men hand power to whoever promises protection. Elias folded the map carefully, as if rough hands could still show respect. Why not take this to your people? Iona looked west, where the mesa rose red and distant. I tried. His men found me first. My brother may already be coming. If he sees me with you, with that paper signed, he will believe the worst before he hears the truth. Elias understood how narrow the bridge had become. On one side, a town ready to hate. On the other, a brother ready to avenge dishonor. Between them stood a woman everyone had tried to turn into proof of their own story. Your brother's name? Nate Red Willow. Elias breathed out slowly. He knew the name. Every settlement within 50 miles knew it, not as a saloon rumor, but as a warning spoken with respect. Nate was not reckless. That made him more dangerous. How many ride with him? Enough. The word hung there like distant thunder. Iona took the map back and stitched it into the seam with quick, practiced motions. Her hands trembled only once, and Elias pretended not to see. If I speak, Silas will call me a liar. If you speak, they will say you were fooled by me. If my brother arrives before the truth is shown, men will reach for guns. Elias looked at the empty country around them, bright and merciless under noon sun. Then we do not give Silas the story he wants. And what story do we give him? Elias touched the silver coin at his throat, feeling the worn edge where her mother's hands had once held it. The one he cannot survive. Iona studied him. You speak like a man with a plan. No, he said. I speak like a man who knows where Silas hides his pride. He turned his horse toward Broken Mesa. Tonight, he will expect us to run, and we will not. No, we are going back to the ranch. Her eyes narrowed. That is the first place they will look. Yes, Elias said. And by sundown, it is the place everyone will be watching. By late afternoon, Broken Mesa stood quiet under a sky the color of brass, and Elias Mercer's ranch looked smaller than it had the night before. Smaller, but not weaker. A house, a barn, 2 corrals, a windmill that complained with every turn, and a long strip of open ground where no lie could hide once enough eyes were gathered to see it. Elias unsaddled both horses in plain view, then left the front gate open. Iona watched from the porch, the bandage on her wrist clean now, the map stitched back into her dress, the wooden tag lying on the table inside like a thing waiting to be judged. You want them to come, she said. Elias poured water into the trough. I want Silas to believe he is still leading the dance. And my brother? Elias looked toward the western ridges. I expect he is already close enough to see our dust. Iona said nothing, but her eyes moved to the far line of stone where heat shimmered and shadows gathered. She had not seen Nate in nearly 2 years. Last time, he had still laughed sometimes, still listened before anger, still carried their mother's songs in his voice when the fire burned low. But grief changes men. Responsibility hardens them. If he had heard his sister had been taken, marked, and signed over by a white cowboy, he would not come as a brother first. He would come as a chief. The first sign was not sound. It was the horses lifting their heads. Then the cattle shifted away from the west fence. Then the wind seemed to thin. Elias stepped out from the barn with his rifle in one hand, and Iona felt her chest tighten. But he only walked to the chopping block, laid the rifle across it, and stepped back empty-handed. Do not do that for show, she said. I am not. Then why? Because if your brother sees a gun before he sees you, Silas has already won. The words had barely settled when riders appeared along the ridge, one by one, then in a long dark line against the sinking sun. They came without shouting, without dust wasted, without wild movement. Apache riders, straight-backed and silent, spreading across the high ground like the land itself had grown eyes. At their center rode a man in a dark blanket with red edging, his hair tied back, his face still in a way that made stillness feel sharper than anger. Nate Redwillow. Iona stepped off the porch before Elias could speak. Her brother's horse came down the slope at a walk, the others following only to the fence line. He looked at her wrist, the white man's house, the open gate, then the paper on the porch table, visible through the door because Elias had placed it there. His gaze moved to Elias, and whatever pain lived in him turned to stone. "You signed for my sister," Nate said. His English was clear, low, and dangerous because it did not need to rise. Elias stood with his hands loose at his sides. "Yes, Elias," Iona said sharply. But he did not look away from Nate. "I signed so Silas Crow could not take her north." Nate's eyes did not soften. A cage with a kind lock is still a cage. Iona walked between them. "Brother, listen to me." Nate's face changed then, only for her. A crack in the stone. A flash of the boy who had once carried her across a flooded wash when she was small. "I am listening," he said. "But I am also seeing." He pointed to the paper. "His name. Your captivity. Their law." Elias reached slowly into his vest, and half the riders shifted before he stopped, palm open. "Only the paper," he said. He took it out and laid it on the dirt between them. Then he removed the silver coin from his neck and placed it beside the paper. Iona's breath caught. Nate looked down, and for the first time uncertainty crossed his face. He knew that coin. He had seen their mother hold its twin. Near the fire, telling of a young soldier who opened a gate when every other gate had closed. Before he could speak, another sound came from the east road. Wagon wheels. Town horses. Men talking too loudly because fear had made them brave in a crowd. Silas Crow was coming with Mercy Creek behind him, exactly as Elias had wanted and exactly as Iona feared. Silas Crow arrived with the town behind him and a smile wide enough to hide every rotten thing he had ever done. 2 wagons stopped near the east fence. A dozen riders spread behind them. Sheriff Hollis sat stiff in his saddle, eyes moving from Elias to Iona, from Iona to Nate, and from Nate to the silent Apache riders along the ridge. The whole yard held its breath. Silas stepped down first, brushing dust from his sleeve like he had come to settle a church matter instead of light a fuse. "Well now," he called. "Looks like I was right to worry. Mercer signs for an Apache woman, and by sundown her people surround honest ranch land." No one answered. That bothered him. A liar needs noise the way fire needs dry grass. Elias stood in the open yard with no gun on him, his rifle resting on the chopping block 20 feet away. Iona stood to his left. Nate stood to his right. Between them, on the dirt, lay the signed paper and the silver coin. Silas saw both, and for one clean second his face lost its color. Then the smile returned. "Sheriff, there is your proof. My paper. My lawful claim. Mercer interfered with property tied to a debt." Iona stepped forward before Elias could speak. Her voice was calm, but it carried to the fence line. "I was never a debt." Silas laughed softly. "You expect this town to take your word?" A few men shifted. "Not many. Enough." Iona reached down, took hold of the hem of her dress, and tore loose a narrow strip where the stitching had been doubled. No one moved. Even the horses seemed to listen. From the seam, she drew the folded map, creased and worn from being carried close. She held it out, not to Elias, not to Nate, but to Sheriff Hollis. "Then take his." The sheriff did not dismount. His mouth opened, then closed. Fear had made a small man out of him. Elias picked up the map and walked it halfway across the yard, stopping where the sheriff could reach without entering Apache shadow or cowboy trust. "Freight Road," Elias said. "North Wash. Dates. Drop points. Rifle marks. Ask your deputy where Silas rode 3 nights ago." Silas's smile twitched. "That is a trick." Nate's eyes lifted, but Elias raised one empty hand, not to command him, only to hold the moment steady. "No," Elias said. "It is ink." A murmur moved through the townspeople. Dr. Bell, standing near the second wagon, leaned forward. "I saw Crow's man ride north that night." The livery boy spoke next, barely above a whisper. "He bought grain for 6 horses. Said it was for 2. One truth called another out of hiding. A freighter admitted he had seen covered crates near the wash. A widow said Silas had warned her of Apache raids before any sign appeared. Each small word landed in the dust like a nail in a coffin no one had meant to build. Silas turned on them, but the crowd began to step away from him. Not far, just enough to make loneliness visible. Then Nate bent and lifted the silver coin. He turned it in his fingers, studying the old red willow pattern, the mark his mother had hammered by hand. His face changed slowly, painfully, as memory crossed anger and did not ask permission. Our mother spoke of this coin, he said. She said a young soldier opened a gate when others closed their hearts. Elias looked down. I was late. Nate stared at him for a long breath. But you opened it. Iona stepped beside Elias then, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, not hiding behind him, not standing in front of him, simply standing with him. Silas saw it and understood the day was slipping from his hands. Sheriff, he snapped, arrest him. Arrest her. Arrest somebody before this turns ugly. Sheriff Hollis looked at the map, then at the Apache riders, then at the townspeople who no longer met Silas's eyes. At last, he climbed down from his horse. His knees looked weak, but he stood. Silas Crow, he said, voice rough as a dry board. You will come with me. No gun fired. No one shouted. The only sound was the wind turning. The mill above Elias Mercer's well. Silas looked around for a friend and found only witnesses. Iona reached to her throat, untied the wooden tag, and held it in her palm. She walked to Silas and placed it against his coat, not with anger, but with a calm that made anger seem small. This was never mine, she said. Carry it yourself. By the time the sun touched the western rim of Broken Mesa, Silas Crow sat in the sheriff's wagon with the wooden tag tied to his coat, and every eye in Mercy Creek fixed on the words he had once meant for someone else. No one cheered. That would have made it smaller. They only watched him pass in a silence, so complete it seemed to scrape the paint from the false face he had worn for years. Sheriff Hollis drove slowly, not proud, not brave, but finally useful. Dr. Bell removed his hat when Iona looked his way. The livery boy did the same. One by one, others followed, not because they understood everything, and not because one afternoon could wash away years of fear, but because shame had entered the street and found places to sit. Nate's red willow stood beside his horse at the fence line, the silver coin resting in his palm. His warriors waited behind him, still as dusk. Iona knew that stillness. It was not peace yet. It was the first breath after danger had chosen another road. Elias stood near the porch, hands empty, face turned toward the ground where the signed paper lay torn in two. He had waited until Silas was gone. Then he had ripped the paper once, clean down the middle, and let both halves fall into the dust. Iona watched it settle. Something inside her settled with it. Nate came to her slowly. For a moment, brother and sister only looked at each other, carrying all the missing years between them. Then he touched her shoulder with 2 fingers, the old family greeting their mother had taught them when words were too small. Come home, he said. Iona closed her eyes. Home. The words smelled of cedar smoke, roasted corn, and river water over stone. It sounded like women singing low while grinding meal, like children running before sunrise, like her mother laughing before grief learned the way to their door. She wanted it. That was the truth. She wanted to ride west with Nate and be folded back into the people who had held her name before strangers tried to mark her with theirs. Elias heard the words and stepped back, giving her a path before she had asked for one. That was what broke her heart open. Not a plea, not a claim, just room. Nate noticed. So did Iona. She walked to Elias, stopping close enough to see the tired lines near his eyes, the dust on his collar, the place where the coin had rested against his chest for years. You gave it back, she said. Elias looked toward Nate. It was never mine to keep. I do not mean the coin. He understood then, and the understanding hurt him. He looked away toward the windmill, turning slow above the well. Iona, you owe me nothing. She smiled faintly, not soft, but alive. I know. The 2 words changed everything. A debt could be forced. Gratitude could be expected. Love could not live under either one. She turned and walked to her brother. For one long breath, Elias thought that was the end, and he accepted it with the quiet dignity of a man who had finally done one good thing without asking it to return. Iona mounted her horse. Nate mounted his. The Apache riders began to move west, their shadows long across the red earth. Elias stayed by the porch, one hand on the rail, watching dust rise behind them. Then Iona stopped at the open gate. She looked at the wooden posts, the yard, the house that had first looked like a cage and later like shelter. She looked at Elias, standing alone exactly as he had when the world brought her to him. Then she turned her horse around. Nache did not stop her. He only watched, and in his eyes was sorrow, pride, and the beginning of trust. Iona rode back across the yard and dismounted before Elias could move. "I was carried here by another man's lie," she said. "I leave when I choose. I return when I choose." Elias swallowed, but said nothing. She took his hand, placed the silver coin in his palm, and closed his fingers around it. "My mother gave you a weight," she said. "I give you a promise." The wind moved through the corral. Somewhere, beyond the mesa, a meadowlark called once and vanished into evening. Elias looked at their joined hands, then at her face, and for the first time since she had known him, the sadness in him did not stand alone. Out here, justice did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came as a woman removing a tag from her own throat. Sometimes it came as a man brave enough not to hold what he loved. And sometimes, when the dust settled and the last wagon rolled away, it came as two people standing in the doorway of a quiet ranch, free enough to choose